Welcome to the third part of the series, The Divine Will in the Church. And the third part will cover the prophetic insight into the future church from the Book of Heaven. These excerpts from the Book of Heaven have been categorized, as done in the previous two episodes of this podcast series, based upon just logical definition of how they should be presented together. So within the next few excerpts, they'll cover the range of chastisement, also analogies of the future church to Jerusalem, and also to the period of the redemption when Jesus was alive with us in the flesh. And before I get started, I'd just like to offer this podcast as an act in the divine will, multiplied by all the divine acts throughout all of eternity. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The first excerpt is, "My justice will give to fire and water the power of the office which they contain, in order to destroy peoples and entire cities. Therefore, a little bit of your suffering is necessary in order to reduce the chastisements by half." And that's a reference of Jesus speaking to Luisa Piccarreta. And Luisa Piccarreta was a suffering soul, intercessory soul on behalf of all of us, who suffered a great deal and was bedridden for years and years, and at the end of her life only lived on the Eucharist. And it's through her sufferings, Jesus is saying, that chastisements have been cut in half. So some of these chastisements, as you can see from the date, 1923 here, and may already transpired, and I'll try to point those out as we go through. Faith, religion, and salvation would be even more banned by the world, especially considering the attitude of the souls during these times. So that is the reason why chastisements occur. And I know that's often a stumbling block for people who look at suffering in terms of, how can God will this? Well, God does not will suffering, but permits it. There's a difference between the actual will and the permissive will. And in this case, what Jesus is telling us is that chastisements are needed in order to bring people back to the faith and to God from going down the wrong path. So actually, chastisements in this perspective is an act of mercy. Nations for which I had predilection, Italy and France, are those which denied me the most. They held hands in offending me. Fair chastisement, they will hold hands in being humiliated, and they will also be the ones who will start war against the church. So this may have been, looking at the date 1916, this may have been a chastisement that has already transpired. You can think of France and the role against the church they've taken during the French Revolution. Also Italy, who was allied with Nazi Germany during World War II, and also how Nazi Germany persecuted the Catholic Church. Italy suffered by means of being invaded. Mussolini, who was the dictator of Italy at the time, he was deposed and actually killed by an Italian mob. In France, they were also overrun by Nazi Germany, and they suffered greatly. And this is Luisa Piccarreta speaking. This morning, my benign Jesus came all afflicted, and the first words he spoke to me were, "Poor Rome, how you will be destroyed. In looking at you, I cry over you." And he was saying this with such tenderness as to arouse compassion. But I could not understand whether it was only about the people or also the buildings. So in this case, and this often happens where um, someone who has apparitions or these spiritual experiences, they may recount them, but they may not have full understanding. In other words, Jesus may not provide them with the knowledge of everything that's concerning. So she's saying here she doesn't understand what is meant by Rome will be destroyed. On the base, from the superficial view of it, it sounds like it would be demolished, but she says she doesn't know whether that would be just the people or also the buildings. And what that could mean there is not the actual death of the people and destruction of the buildings, but it could mean the destruction of the faith or the apostasy that we discussed in the previous two podcasts concerning the Book of Heaven and the church. My daughter, the greatest chastisement is the triumph of the evil. That's important for us to note. More purges are needed, and through their triumph, the evil will purge my church. Then I will crush them and scatter them like dust in the wind. Therefore, do not be troubled at the triumphs that you hear, but cry with me over their sad lot. So often, when people talk about chastisements, and you see that most of the time when it's discussed, people refer to volcanoes and floods and nuclear holocaust, comets coming down and wiping out civilization. But the greatest chastisement, according to the Book of Heaven, is the triumph of the evil. And that could be evil shepherds, that could be evil secular rulers, evil in general. And here we begin discussion regarding the analogy of the redemption. And this excerpt is a reference back to the apostles. And this tells us the extent of the purges that was mentioned in the previous excerpt of what that will entail. Don't you remember that I founded my church with 12 apostles? In the same way, those few who will remain, I'll emphasize, those few who will remain, will be enough to reform the world. So this makes me think that what we talked about with the destruction of Rome is not, and because Luisa Piccarreta didn't understand that to be destruction of buildings, or wasn't clear about it, it makes me think that we're talking about the destruction of the faith, the apostasy. My daughter, in order for redemption to come, it took 4,000 years, because the people that prayed and longed for the future Redeemer was the smallest one of limited number. But those that belong to my church are more peoples, and oh, how much greater in number than that one. Therefore, the number will shorten the time, more so since religion is making its way everywhere, and this is nothing but the preparation for the kingdom of my divine will. Again, we're talking about in this excerpt an analogy of redemption. Rome, in which resides my representative on earth, the Roman pontiff, from whom come my divine laws, and just as he makes it his duty to make my redemption known to the peoples, so will he make it his duty to make known the kingdom of my divine will. It can be said that one and the other will proceed in the same way and manner, as the kingdom of my supreme fiat, which is the divine will, must unfold. Very interesting, very much a revelation regarding the role of the Pope. And what is being said here is that during redemption, it was the Pope who was Jesus' leader of the church on earth and promulgated the divine laws and made known redemption of Jesus to the whole world. And so it'll be the same with the divine will, or the kingdom of the divine will. The Pope will make known the divine will and also lead in his teachings. And here is an analogy back to Jerusalem. It's very wordy, and if you want to, you can pause and reread. My daughter, if Rome has the primacy of my church, she owes it to Jerusalem, because the beginning of redemption was precisely in Jerusalem. Within that homeland, from the little town of Nazareth, I chose my Virgin Mother. I myself was born in the little town of Bethlehem, and all of my apostles were from that homeland. And even though ungrateful, she, which is Jerusalem, did not want to recognize me and rejected the goods of my redemption, it cannot be denied that the origin, the beginning, the first peoples who received the good of it were from this city. The first criers of the gospel, those who established Catholicism in Rome, were my apostles, all from Jerusalem, that is, from this homeland. So that sets the stage for this next paragraph, I think, which is very important. Now there will be an exchange. If Jerusalem gave to Rome the life of religion and therefore of redemption, Rome will give to Jerusalem the kingdom of the divine will. And this is so true that just as I chose a virgin from the little town of Nazareth for the redemption, so I have chosen another virgin in the little town of Italy belonging to Rome, in whom the mission of the kingdom of the divine fiat has been entrusted. And since it must be known in Rome, just as my coming upon earth was known in Jerusalem, Rome will have the great honor of requiting Jerusalem for the great gift received from her, which is redemption, by making known to her, her being Jerusalem, the kingdom of my will. So this speaks of the conversion of the Jews, where they will accept the divine will as what was shown previously, previous excerpt, promulgated and supported by the Pope of Rome. I'm sorry, I skipped a little bit ahead here. Here's another one of Jerusalem. Then will Jerusalem repent of her ingratitude and will embrace a life of the religion that she gave to Rome. And grateful, she will receive from Rome the life and the great gift of the kingdom of my divine will. And not only Jerusalem, but all the other nations will receive from Rome the great gift of the kingdom of my fiat. The first criers of it, its gospel, all full of peace, of happiness, and of restoration of the creation of man. So this is saying outright, and there's so many words, that not only will Jerusalem be converted, but this kingdom of Jesus' divine will spread throughout the earth. Also, it makes reference to the restoration of the creation of man, which, if this is the first time you're seeing any material on the divine will, I recommend strongly you go to an introduction of the divine will. There's many of them. That the initial creation of man, when Adam existed, he existed in the divine will prior to the fall. The next couple are about restoration, and the next one is about our Blessed Mother. Germany will be Catholic. I have great designs upon for her. England, Russia, and all the places where blood has been shed will rise again to faith and will be incorporated into my church. Again, speaking of the universal acceptance of the divine will. I see that these writings will be for my church as a new sun, which will rise in our midst, and men attracted by its radiant light will strive to transform themselves into this light and become spiritualized and divinized, and therefore, renewing the church, they will transform the face of the earth. So this idea of restoration is not just restoration for the church, but also the whole world. The next excerpt is about our Blessed Mother Mary, and this also is a prophecy, and it's not just a description or a talk about Mary and her many titles that she has, but the prophetic role or the prophecies regarding the role of Mary that will occur in the future. Our love for her is such that just as we have our hierarchy of angels in heaven, as well as the various orders of saints, the great lady, celestial empress, and owner of the great inheritance of our will call her own children to possess her inheritance when our kingdom will be established on earth. We will give her the great glory of having her form the new hierarchy that will be similar to the 9 choirs of angels. So she will have the choir of seraphim, of cherubim, and so forth, as well as the new order of the saints who lived in her inheritance. And she will have formed them on earth. She will take them to heaven, surrounding herself with the new hierarchy, the newborn in the divine fiat, reborn in her own love, those who lived in her inheritance. So this also touches upon an excerpt in one of the first 2 podcasts regarding the hierarchy of the divine will. And what it's saying here is it will be formed first on earth and then in heaven. This will be the fulfillment of the work of creation. Our consummatum est. We will have the kingdom of our will among creatures, thanks to the celestial heir who wanted to give her life for each of them, to make it reign. How glorified and happy we will be, because the sovereign queen will have her own hierarchy, just as we keep ours. Even more so, since our own hierarchy will be hers too, or hers will be ours, because all that is done in our will is inseparable. This is actually, and I've read many books about our Blessed Mother, some of the best, like St. Liguori and St. Montfort. This is one of the most beautiful statements about our Blessed Mother Mary that I've ever read, and also gives us such a tremendous amount of hope for our future. And I'd like to end, as always, with references and recommendations for future research into the divine will, future self-education. The first two are YouTube searches, and then there's some references to some websites that have excellent material concerning the divine will, and the last one contains actual downloads of the Book of Heaven. Again, thank you for joining.